achieved.
I am absolutely exhausted and sickened by the fact that there's idiots out there, these keyboard warriors, these keyboard champions, who routinely refer, especially to the women's bantamweight fighters, but more so to the women's strawweight fighters, as people that because they're women, because they're smaller, they could easily beat up simply because you're a man and you have some significant size advantage. Welcome back to Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions. As always, I'm your host, Scott Johnson. What I'm referring to is the at UFC on Fox, we saw Paige Van Zandt win a massive fight over Felice Herrig in a pretty impressive performance. And I read a lot of the forums saying, regardless of what she is, I could beat her up simply because I'm a man and I'm bigger. She's a trained athlete, a trained fighter, and not, I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but in most scenarios, she's going to beat up pretty much, any layperson, any normal person who would step in the cage with her who isn't trained. She might not be able to knock you out like Junior Dos Santos with one punch, but she'll outwork you to the point of exhaustion. After about a minute and a half of trying to put up with her attacking you, you're going to be in some serious trouble, and you're an absolute idiot if you think otherwise. And I'm not saying, I'm not promoting men versus women. I'm just saying if you have that lack of respect for these women and for athletes in general, you should probably stop watching the sport and go watch something else, you idiots. For this event, moving on after my little rant, we're looking at UFC 186. I'm breaking in the 5 main card fights as always. All of my preliminary predictions will be available at kamikazeoverdrive.net. Please check them out. The bet packs will also be posted. I'm looking forward to breaking down the fights there, both from a betting perspective and as always just trying to straight up pick the winners. The prediction panel will be posting their picks. The polls are live. Please make your picks there. And also the DraftKings competition for UFC 186 will be posted. It's $10 to enter. I'm going to try and change it up a little bit. It'll probably be 20 entrants still, but I'm going to set it up so probably the top 2 win prizes. I don't know how they break it up. So you'll have to click on the link, check the information, and go from there. It'll still be a lot of fun, so I suggest you certainly sign up. One other thing before we get into the predictions, the UFC has recently announced, or I guess announced today, that they are switching gears with how their Reebok promotion will come about. Instead of basing payment on rankings, fighter rankings, and where you rank in the division, it'll be based on tenure. Everybody says, that's fantastic. Where to a certain extent it is, but keep this in mind. I think the UFC, they're going to talk about Strikeforce fights and WEC fights, and obviously previous UFC fights, on the books. But keep in mind that the UFC is going to be more likely now to let guys go, realizing, okay, this guy's one fight away from jumping a pay bracket, and Reebok's going to have to pay him more. He'll earn bigger sponsorship. They're probably going to be more likely to want to keep Reebok happy and let somebody go quicker and cut people quicker, and might not bring them back, and we more willing to bring in lesser known fighters that are, the lower Reebok scale. And a lot of people will say, that doesn't affect them that much, but still there's going to be a connection. They're going to want to keep their sponsor happy. So we'll see how that plays out, but that's an interesting scenario I was thinking about. Let me know in the comments what you think about the new arrangement. Obviously, Dana White, Uncle Dana, and the rest of the crew admitting they might have made a mistake based on the public outcry, or at least the outcry from the fighters. A couple rants from me. Let's get to the predictions. And hold on, I got one more rant that's going to come at the end of the show, so make sure you stay tuned because I'm going to jump on some other people who've been pissing me off of late. Now, our first prediction takes place in the UFC's bantamweight division. Yves Tiger Jabouin, 29-0, battles Thomas Almeida, undefeated with a perfect record of 18 wins and no losses. For Almeida, this is his second UFC bout. He's currently said he's undefeated. This is his first fight in Canada, only his third fight in his career outside of his native Brazil, and he's entering as a massive favorite despite the disparity in UFC experience. For Jabouin, this is his 9th fight in the UFC. He's 5-3 overall, 5-2 since cutting down to bantamweight. He is coming off a 10.5-month layoff, so a little significant there. And as going back to Almeida, Yves Jabouin represents a pretty significant step up in competition compared to anyone he has faced to date in his young career. Physically, Jabouin 1 inch taller. Almeida has a 2-inch reach advantage. So both guys have big knockout numbers. Looking at Yves first, 11 wins by knockout. He also has 8 wins by decision compared to Almeida, 13 wins by knockout, 4 wins by submission. He's only gone the distance once, and it was obviously a victory being undefeated, and it happened in his UFC debut against Timmy Gorman. On the negative side of things, Yves, 4 losses by knockout, 3 by submission, so some big stoppage numbers there. Almeida, 15 first-round finishes. Pretty darn impressive. So his guy's a finisher, and he gets the job done very quickly. Looking first, the Brazilian, he's known for his striking, but he's also a BJJ brown belt. Compared to Yves Jabouin, he's a seasoned and very capable striker, and he has underrated wrestling, which we really saw in his last appearance. The big thing with Almeida coming into his debut is his ability to deal with wrestlers, and he fought Tim Gorman, who's a very good wrestler. He's a good wrestler, serviceable wrestler, and he beat Timmy Gorman. He was taken down early in that matchup, got his back taken, but he eventually defended, showed some pretty excellent balance, got up, wore Gorman out looking for takedowns, and eventually took that fight over with his striking. He is a fantastic striker. He has a nice variety, tight, crisp technique. He attacks in very tight spaces, very quick with his hands. He likes to go to the body. He has some really good knees to the body as well. He'll mix in. finishes combinations quite frequently with a kick, and tie clinch and knees is also something we could see him utilize here. In his last fight, he kept the pressure on very effectively, cuts off the cage nicely, landed 122 strikes at 55% striking accuracy, so some very good statistics for a young man making his debut. Now, keep in mind, though, in that matchup, he was the vastly superior striker compared to his opponent, and he still took some damage, though. His face was busted up pretty bad going after the fight was over, despite the fact that he was leaps and bounds ahead of his opponent. And actually, one thing to keep in mind, too, a lot of people talk about maybe he slowed down a little bit. His output improved as the fight went on, but that also had a lot to do probably with Gorman slowing down. Now, looking at Yves, he uses a lot of movement in his striking, like nice variety in his attack, good kicking game, front leg techniques he likes to throw, some flashy spinning attacks as well he'll mix in. He's a pretty decent counter striker. When he fought Eddie Wineland, he was able to land some good counters every time Wineland came in. He likes to strike going backwards, which can be effective catching an aggressive opponent, and he has lots of movement, which can mess with an opponent's timing. Now, statistically, a couple concerning factors, only a positive .22 striking exchange, which means he gets hit almost as much as he hits, and for a guy that relies heavily on his striking, that's a concern. 3 of his last 4 losses have come by knockout, but against the guys like Brad Pickett, Eddie Wineland, and Mark Hominick at featherweight, those guys can throw heat. Almeida, a good striker, we'll see, and he clearly has the numbers, we'll see if he can back it up at this level. He does tend to get caught during exchanges, and it's certainly a concern against Almeida, who's got quick hands and can really put a quick combination on a chin very quickly. I was actually really quite impressed with Jabouin's wrestling in his last matchup against Mike Easton. He landed 5 of 8 takedowns against a guy who only gave up 6 takedowns through his first 6 fights, including when he fought TJ Dillashaw, who only took him down 2 times on 5 attempts. And I think it's a lot of benefits of working at TriStar. Almeida is very talented, but he's built the majority of his record against lower-level competition and relative new fighters. For Yves, he needs to be exceptionally careful during exchanges, especially in close, but I think he's actually had a lot of success melding his wrestling and striking together, and he's going to be a little bit more diverse with his attack instead of wrestling and striking. And I'm going to call the upset here. I'm going to call Yves Jabouin to defeat Thomas Almeida. I'll take Jabouin by decision. Fight number 2 is in the UFC's lightweight division. John the Bull Makdessi, 12-3-0, battling UFC debutant Shane Campbell, 11-2-0, a little Canadian versus Canadian action here in this matchup. Campbell, as I said, he's debuting. He's taking this fight on roughly 3 weeks' notice, replacing the injured Abel Trujillo, and he's only 2 months removed from his World Series of Fighting victory and getting picked up for this opportunity. For Makdessi, kind of the opposite scenario, 14-month layoff. He's coming off a controversial loss to a Brazilian fighter, Alan Patrick, which was, I thought Makdessi won that fight. Obviously, he didn't get the nod. Campbell, 3-inch reach advantage, 2-inch height advantage. For Campbell, he's a Muay Thai fighter. 62-9 as a pro kickboxer, versus Makdessi comes from Taekwondo and karate backgrounds. So pretty diverse striking repertoires for both guys. Now, both guys have their biggest win totals are knockouts. Makdessi 8 of 12 wins by knockout. Campbell has 5 wins by knockout. Campbell, his last 3 wins have all come by either knockout or TKO. The only loss he has in there is against former UFCer and also striking-based fighter Jesse Ronson. For Makdessi, he is coming off a knockout win. His last win was a knockout over Rene Forch. He also scored a pretty impressive knockout win over Kyle Watson in his second UFC fight, and he has striking-based decision victories over Sam Stout and Darren Cruikshank. But at the same time, he lost a striking-based fight to Anthony Njokuani. So this guy, he's been fairly consistent with his ability to beat guys in primarily striking fights contested on the feet. This bout, not surprisingly, should be contested standing with minimal focus on the ground game, and that should benefit both men who will not have to concern themselves as much with defensive grappling and wrestling. Of the two, I would say Shane Campbell is more likely to look for a takedown. He does have 2 wins by submission, and they both came not that long ago. But I could see him wanting to test his striking out here. For Makdessi, he presents an incredibly difficult front to attack. He has that sideways stance, throws a variety of unique kicking techniques, really a lot of lead leg techniques, 4.53 strikes landed per minute versus 3.26 strikes absorbed per minute, so a pretty solid striking positive exchange rate. Now, his strikes absorbed per minute are inflated by the Hallman fight, which he got taken down and pounded on until he was eventually submitted, and the Njokuani fight where he came in overweight and looked a little lethargic. You take those 2 fights off the books, and he has a pretty one-sided strikes landed per minute versus strikes absorbed per minute number. He's outlanded everyone else pretty consistently. He has a nice sharp counter jab, which we saw him use very effectively against Sam Stout. Every time Stout came in, he turned his aggression against him and popped him with it, and that really was a positive for Makdessi. The spinning back fist versus Watson showed his flashier side. He will threaten with those attacks, but he needs to avoid telegraphing them against a guy like Campbell, who will look to counter. For Campbell, he has a very solid kicking game, nice boxing-based attack, good body and leg kicks. He'll go both ways. He'll have sharp combinations. He will work the clinch if the opportunity presents itself. We saw him use his body kick to do a lot of damage when he used that Hadouken-style maneuver after he landed a brutal body kick in his World Series of Fighting debut. He's very effective with that. He also, in one of his MFC fights I saw him compete in, he landed a very nice body kick as well. In this matchup, Campbell needs to either fight at reach, or at distance, or stay very close and work the clinch game, but he can't stay in Makdessi's range. He's got to use that reach and stay out of range or getting close inside the kicking range and work the odd takedown if the opportunity presents itself, even though I don't think it's that likely. Makdessi should have the speed advantage. He also has the advantage of fighting at full camp. He's got that unique style that both offensively and defensively can be very difficult to engage with. Keep in mind, Campbell's last fight was fought at welterweight, so he's cutting down to lightweight, which can be difficult when you're dealing with a guy. If the cut's difficult, the short notice is difficult, the speed factor of the new division can also make it very difficult. So there's a lot of advantages for John Makdessi. I think, Makdessi's looked very good in primarily striking-based fights, which this will be. I think it'll be an entertaining bout, but my prediction is John Makdessi to defeat Shane Campbell by decision. Bout number 3 on the main card is in the UFC's light heavyweight division and features the number 13th ranked and always fun to watch, Fabio Maldonado, with a current record of 22 wins and 7 defeats. He's taking on the debuting and late injury replacement Steve the Boss Bosse, with a record of 10 wins and 1 defeat. Now, Fabio Maldonado was originally scheduled to face Rampage, which looks like it had a lot of potential. Obviously, Bellator stepped in and said, I don't think so, we got to figure this out legally, and Rampage is on hiatus as of right now. So, certainly not happy about that. For Bosse, he's filling in as an injury replacement. He originally signed with the UFC, was scheduled to face Ryan Jimmo at the Ultimate Fighter Nations event. He pulled out due to injury, ultimately retired. Now he's given an opportunity to get back in the game, and here we go. Keep in mind some big numbers here. He has not fought in 25 months. That's a significant layoff. In addition, he only has 2 pro fights since 2010, so he's been very inactive over that stretch as well. Now, interesting thing with him, and Canadians are going to love this, he's a former hockey enforcer, a former hockey fighter. I think he's semi-pro, or he used to be. But he does have a solid MMA resume for a regional fighter. He has a couple of big names on his list, like Houston Alexander, who he defeated, Marvin Easton, who he defeated, and Wes Sim back in 2008, who he bested as well. For Fabio Maldonado, he has 4 straight wins as a light heavyweight. He does have a knockout loss when he fought a heavyweight against Stipe Miocic mixed in there, but still pretty impressive of late, even though he's certainly a flawed fighter. Now, for Fabio, this is the first time not fighting in Brazil since 2012, 6 fights, so certainly he's been at home, had the home advantage. Now he's going on the road to face a man from Quebec, from more specifically Montreal, in Montreal. Both guys are primarily strikers. Fabio, 13 wins by knockout. Bosse, 8 of 10 wins by knockout, so you can probably anticipate where this fight is going to play out. For Bosse, all 8 of his knockout wins have come inside the first round. Fabio Maldonado, only 4 of those 13 knockout wins have come in the first round. The rest, obviously, after the first, and that has a lot to do with the way Fabio Maldonado knocks guys out. And you're going to hear this a couple times in the next couple breakdowns, death by accumulation. And obviously, what we have here is Bosse's power versus Fabio's volume. Statistically, Maldonado, big output numbers, 5.92 strikes per minute, landed per minute. Unfortunately, 4.03 strikes absorbed per minute. So he lands a lot, and he gets hit a lot. High output, but also, getting hit a ton takes away from that a little bit. What he does well, he works the body exceptionally well. He doesn't throw 100% power strikes, so he can throw a lot of them. Not great cardio, but he can still sustain an attack to the point where he's showing the judges he can win, or he can overwhelm a guy and finish like he has, in recent fights. For him, he wants to fight this fight in a phone booth, keep his opponent backing up, keep him uncomfortable and unable to really get those arms extended. He's the type of guy who likes to invite his opposition to attack him, which I really hate when guys do that, because that adds up, especially if you can land something significant. And we haven't seen it in the UFC in recent memory, but we're going to see somebody call someone in to hit them, and then they're going to get cracked, and they're going to go down, and it's going to be epic. Nonetheless, Bosse, more of a power puncher, throws hard, relies primarily on his boxing when he does so. He is hittable, and he tends to leave himself open at times, especially his midsection, which at times seems to be a little bit exposed and out there for his opposition to really crack with some good shots. But again, he relies primarily on his boxing, and while his deficits haven't cost him yet, it's the new level of fighting he's headed towards. He now is training out of TriStar, and the question is he going to look to try and exploit Maldonado on the mat, who certainly has a wrestling and defensive wrestling, counter grappling issues. He doesn't appear to have the good enough grappling skills to exploit that, but that's a big question as to whether he can or not, and whether he'll be able to. If he does, that's a great game plan. If he doesn't, he's looking to go with what brought him to the dance. Fabio certainly is a flawed fighter, but the guy is tough as nails. Glover Teixeira beat the absolute crap out of him, and he stuck around as long as he possibly could. All of Bosse's wins have come, or KOs have come in the first round. Just 3 fights out of the opening round. The long layoff as well, the minimal activity he's had, the short notice, all suggest and tell me that if he can't end this fight early in the first round, he could, or at least in the first round, he could be in some significant trouble. Either Fabio's volume gets him in a decision, simply outworking him, or it piles up to the point that Bosse can't take it and relent. We've seen that both happen to recent opponents by Fabio Maldonado. Now, he has been a benefactor of increased temperatures fighting in Brazil, but I don't think that's as big an issue here. Maldonado, I expect him to take some damage early. He might probably very well lose the opening round, but I think he rallies, works the body, volume, outworks his opponent, and my prediction is Fabio Maldonado to defeat Steve Bosse by TKO. Now we move to the co-main event of the evening. We're in the UFC's middleweight division. The number 10th ranked Michael, the Count Bisping Ultimate Fighter winner, 26-7-0, battles the number 11th ranked CB, the Doberman Dollaway, the current record of 16 wins and 7 defeats. This is a big fight for both men as they are trying to hang on to relevance in the division. The winner certainly will. I think this applies a little bit more to Bisping, who is certainly older and looking to hang on to his top 10 status and possibly move himself back up. He's not elite by any stretch of the imagination anymore, but he wants to remain in the top 10. Both guys are coming off losses to the main eventers who just fought at UFC on Fox 15. Dollaway was KO'd by a body kick in 61 seconds by Lyoto Machida. Bisping was subbed in the second round after getting dropped by a head kick by Luke Rockhold. Now, the way Rockhold smashed Machida in that matchup, a fight I predicted, I think it lessens the magnitude of Bisping's loss a little bit. He got outclassed for the most part, but we see what Rockhold is certainly turning into what he is becoming. Bisping, he's had mixed results since his return from his eye injury. He was smothered and defeated by Tim Kennedy in a pretty lackluster performance. He took out an aged Kung Lee in a pretty good performance from Bisping, and of course, as we mentioned, the aforementioned losing effort against Luke Rockhold. For CB, he has looked exceptional before the Machida fight. He was 4-1 in a 5-fight stretch, arguably 5-0 with a controversial decision loss against Tim Boetsch, and he really came into his own. Now, CB Dollaway, he's a wrestler with improving striking. Bisping is a striker with an improving wrestling game. So interesting there, they both kind of tightened up areas that they have deficiencies in. We'll see how that plays out here. Physically, CB 1 inch taller, 4 inch reach advantage, so he is the bigger man. Some of the big numbers: Michael Bisping, 15 wins by knockout, which is quite shocking. You wouldn't expect Bisping to have those big numbers, but he has piled up a number of knockouts in his UFC and pre-UFC career. CB Dollaway, he has 6 wins by knockout, 6 wins by decision. Those are his big numbers. Both guys have questionable chins. We'll talk about it this way. Bisping's been knocked out twice. He's had a couple other close calls. I know Vanderlei hurt him. We saw Rockhold hurt him before submitting him. For CB Dollaway, he's been knocked out 3 times in his career. So both guys, one of them was the body kick with Machida, but both guys are susceptible to taking damage and not being able to recover from it. Statistically, Bisping and the Brit, a big edge in strikes landed per minute, almost 2 more than CB Dollaway, and he limits his opponents, both guys limited their opponents to roughly the same amount in the mid-2 range, so a big advantage for CB Dollaway in the output if this fight goes the duration. Bisping's volume and his cardio have been the keys to his success over his career. Outwork guys, that death by accumulation I just mentioned with Fabio Maldonado. Is he still capable in his older, as he gets older, of putting up those big numbers and outworking guys? We've seen him, I think he slipped a little bit with cardio, but still, we saw against Kung Lee, that's how he won that matchup. For Dollaway, as I said, he's improved his striking immensely. He showed the power against Cesar Ferreira and Daniel Sarafian, turning that fight around, even though he didn't knock him out. He has some hard leg kicks, decent combinations. I'd like to see him be more active, but unfortunately, I think that comes with a little bit of a question mark about his cardio, whether he can hold up. Now, he does meld his wrestling into his attack fairly well. We saw him use 3 takedowns against Francis Carmont, the same number against Tim Boetsch, 2 against Sarafian. Could be his key to success here. I haven't been that impressed with his ability to stay on top of guys once he gets them down, and that's certainly an area of concern. For Bisping, he's more effective when he sits down on his punches. And in fights where he's fighting guys with big power, we can see where he isn't comfortable, where he isn't able to sit down, he isn't confident, and that affects his output. And I think that's one thing we saw against Rockhold. I'll talk about that in a moment, and whether I think that's going to show up here or not. Bisping, he has a good kicking game. Goes to the body, goes to the head, nice switch, kick, quick 1-2 combination, circles out, resets, constantly keeping his opponent from settling in, starts to pick up the pace when he senses blood or his opponent's in trouble, and I like that about him. Big question is, can Bisping stay vertical? Good takedown defense, but it was exposed a little bit against Tim Kennedy. He did talk about how he returned a little bit too quickly in that matchup, but again, I said that could be CB Dollaway's path to victory if he can both put him down and keep him down. So far, there have been 2 types of opponents that have beaten Michael Bisping. Guys who were able to maintain a high-paced wrestling attack. Tim Kennedy and Chael Sonnen. Pressure, keep him down, pin him down, and that's 2 areas where he struggled with. or really dangerous heavy-handed strikers. Vitor Belfort, Luke Rockhold, as we saw, or confident strikers. Rockhold, he's got good power, but Vanderlei Silva had, hurt him, and Dan Henderson, all guys that had big power, could threaten him, keep him from settling in, or were able to beat him as a result. Where does CB sit in that conversation? I think Dollaway, he takes a little bit from both. He doesn't bring a constant wrestling threat. He can't keep the pace of it, and he is an imposing guy on the feet to keep Bisping backed off. He tends to have longer periods of inactivity, which I really don't like, even though I am kind of a fan of CB Dollaway. I think Bisping, for the most part, is going to get the better of the exchanges. He's going to pull away as the fight advances and pile up the damage as CB Dollaway slows down. I think he'll be the busier fighter, and CB is known for slowing down in matchups, and I think Bisping will capitalize on that. He's got to be careful with his chin and not get cracked. We've seen guys get over anxious and get knocked out. But my prediction is Michael Bisping to defeat CB Dollaway. I'll take Bisping by decision, possibly a late TKO, but we'll go by decision officially. We move now to the main event of the evening. It's the main event we have, maybe not the main event we wanted or deserved. Steal line from Batman, but I'm looking forward to it nonetheless, and I'm going to talk about the main event we have versus the one we had before in the post-fight breakdown, so make sure you check that out. Nonetheless, we are in the UFC's flyweight division as the champion, Demetrious Mighty Mouse Johnson, 21-2-1, battles the number 8th ranked contender, Kyoji Horiguchi, with a record of 15 wins and just a single defeat, a pretty impressive record. Johnson, as we know, the only flyweight in UFC history, or flyweight champion, sorry, if he was the only flyweight, that would be ridiculous. Not a popular champion, even though he's incredibly effective. He's a damn dominant champion. We'll talk about that. The fans still haven't taken to him, maybe because of his size. Some people having problems with ego. Nonetheless, his last loss came against the bantamweight champion, the uncrowned bantamweight champion, Dominic Cruz. He had a draw against Ian McCall, and then he's won a perfect 7 straight since then, including 5 very impressive title defenses. He has wins over the number one ranked fighter in the division, 2 over the number 2 ranked fighter, defeating the number 3, the number 4, and the number 10 ranked fighter, plus the unranked Ali Bogatinov, who's obviously been pulled because of his suspension due to drug use. Horiguchi comes in ranked 7th in the division, just popping up from 8th. So far, he's 4-0 in the UFC, which is damn impressive. 3-0 as a flyweight after debuting as a bantamweight. Unfortunately, he has no wins over currently ranked opposition. He has a pretty impressive win over Daryl Montague, and he defeated Louis Gaudinot, whom he might have been ranked at the time he was defeated. I can't recall. Nonetheless, nobody in the top 15 has fallen under the hands of the title challenger, and that's kind of the state of affairs we're looking at in the division with the aforementioned winning streak by the champion over the top-ranked guys. I was kind of hoping Horiguchi, I kind of talked about him getting a title shot in my 2014 year-end show, getting a title shot hopefully closer to the end of the year. I wanted to see him get 1 or even 2 fights more to continue improving, but we're in here now getting an opportunity, so let's roll with it. This is a massive fight for Japanese MMA in general. Never had a UFC fighter. He's a Kid Yamamoto training partner, kind of his legacy tied in a little bit there, and this would be significant for him if he could pull this off. But looking first to the champion, what does Demetrious Johnson do well? Question mark. Everything. He's probably the most technically sound fighter in the UFC. Certainly Joe Rogan would like to promote him as, and I'm not going to argue with him because he looks fantastic in just about everything he does. I would like to see him go up and challenge for the bantamweight title. I think it'd be a fantastic fight. Could be the biggest fight of his career. Maybe if Frankie Edgar moved down to bantamweight. Sorry, I got sidetracked there. Nonetheless, Johnson is a fantastic fighter. He does a lot of things well. He's shown more killer instinct of late. Submission wins over Chris Carriazo and John Moraga, plus knocking out Benavidez. So 3 of his last 4 wins have come inside the distance. I'll talk about his skill set in a moment, but he's just an all-around fantastic fighter. For Horiguchi, though, very talented fighter in his own right. 9 wins by knockout. 2 in the UFC. He has significant power. In one of his decisions against Daryl Montague, he hurt him badly, and Montague couldn't even find his corner, and that fight probably should have been called. I've seen far less injuries stop fights. Superficial cuts we saw with Jimmy Hedis stopped that fight where Montague was clearly concussed, clearly unable to locate his corner. That fight should have been called, so obviously, brain damage, not a big deal, ear damage, significant. Sorry, I'm really getting off topic here. Statistically, Horiguchi actually outlands Johnson by about half a strike per minute, and he gets hit on average slightly less than Johnson, but keep in mind it's a smaller sample size for Horiguchi and against far lesser competition, so those numbers really don't account for much, even though they're pretty impressive for Horiguchi, at least what he's doing in a standalone analysis. For Horiguchi, he moves very well, in and out, very quick hands, limits his opponent's chance to attack, has some violent power, and that's what he needs to employ here. Johnson, he has a very similar game, but he is quicker, he's more diverse, We did see him get clipped a couple times by John Dodson, but the question is Horiguchi quick enough to land that one big shot? We've seen other guys try and simply fail miserably. The big difference, though, I think, in this matchup is going to be the wrestling of the champion. His ability to blend takedowns and striking and change level seamlessly is beautiful. He keeps opponents off balance, forces them to focus defensively on multiple things, and takes away their aggression because they don't want to attack and engage and put themselves out there because they're going to get taken down and probably spend a large portion of the round getting beaten up from the bottom, on bottom. Horiguchi, there could be some issues there. He did get himself taken down and in trouble by Dustin Peg in his debut, and a big question mark is his defensive grappling. Johnson's going to test those numbers. He has massive takedown numbers in other fights. He knows how to exploit that. He's a Matt Hume-trained fighter, so once he gets the fight to the ground, grappling as a grappler, he is fantastic. And I think that plays a big role. There's a bigger question here, though, is the cardio. Can Horiguchi keep up with Demetrious Johnson long enough to do something? Johnson has exceptional cardio and keeps a ridiculous pace for 5 rounds against a guy like John Dodson, who's also known for his cardio. The difference in that fight was rounds later in round 3, but more importantly, round 4 and 5, where Johnson simply wore him out, and you could see Dodson wearing. I'm looking forward to the rematch there, but you could see where Johnson was the better fighter. Horiguchi did defend his bantamweight title in Shuto with a 5th round knockout, so he has gone there 5 times, gone to the 5th round once. He has multiple 3-round fights, but this is another level. It's one thing to get to 3 rounds against anybody. It's nothing to get to go the distance with Demetrious Johnson. Can Horiguchi land something early? That's his best chance of victory, to hurt him and possibly finish him. I think Johnson, though, will mix up his wrestling and striking extremely well, outworks him, exhausts him. A decision is possible, but my prediction is Demetrious Johnson to defeat Kyoji Horiguchi by submission. He retains his title as a result and moves on to other things. This could be a good fight, though. It will be a good fight. So those are my 5 main card predictions for UFC 186. Looking forward to the matchup. Now, my other rant I want to talk about briefly is that there are all kinds of idiots who talk about, this fight is crap, this is the worst pay-per-view. Shut your mouths, you idiots. If legacy fighting championships or Bellator and any of these other lesser organizations, and I'm not a UFC shrill, I might sound like it, I like the organization, but I'm the first one to point out when bullshit happens when it's on their account, and I do it all the time. But when other organizations put on a card that has somebody, Pat Healy involved in a fight taking on this guy, and it's like you have 3 recognizable names, and it's like, oh yeah, that's a fantastic card. This is a pretty tight card. Those guys, aren't in the UFC for one reason or another, but the UFC maybe has a couple of injuries come along, people get hurt training, trying to compete, they know they don't want to put their careers on the line by going into a fight hurt, they pull out, and suddenly all hell breaks loose. These are still some of the top fighters in the world competing. We have interesting matchups, and just because you don't know their name and can't take the time to look at Wikipedia and see what their records, see what they bring to the table, or watch a little bit of fight footage, that doesn't make this any less of an exciting opportunity. Yes, we're lacking in a lot of names. Yes, Demetrious Johnson isn't a big name champion like George St. Pierre, like Anderson Silva, like some of the guys of the past. But you know what? If you're not excited to watch these fights, I really question how in-depth a fight fan you are, because there are some fantastic matchups that I'm very much looking forward to. Rant over. As always, thank you very much for listening, and I think we get a week off after this card before we head into a very busy May, another 4 fights. So I'll see you here. Well, I guess I won't see you. I will talk. You will listen. You know the drill. Talk to you later, guys.